Assalamualaikum. My name is Muhammad Nazri bin Mazlan, metric number AN180199. So today I will present my final year project 1. The title is Investigation of Properties of Biocrude Fuel, Pyrolysis Oil and Biodiesel. So my supervisor is Mr. Muhammad Asri bin Azizul and my co-supervisor is TS Dr. Mat Norizam bin Muhammad Jaan. So the content that I will present today, first I will go through the research background, and then the problem statement and objective, then scope of study, literature review, next the methodology, expected result, and lastly the conclusion. So for the research background, 1. Many people are not aware of what exactly alternative fuels are because they are so used to think about gasoline as fuel. One of the main reasons why people are turning away from conventional fuels like oil and petroleum is that they will eventually run out. So the alternative fuel is something that used in place of gasoline to power vehicle. There are a few advantages of using alternative fuels. First, it helps to reduce pollution. The use of alternative fuels considerably decrease harmful exhaust emissions such as carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, particulate matter and sulfur dioxide, as well as ozone-producing emission. Next, it can reuse waste. So biofuels, bioproducts, and biopower provide modern and fresh relevance to the old belief that trash for one person is a treasure for another. Then, it can frequently be produced domestically. Often, alternative fuels can be developed domestically, utilizing a country's resources and thereby strengthening the economy. Next, for research background 2, tire is mainly composed of rubber, include natural rubber and synthetic rubber, carbon black, and many other organic and inorganic addition agents. So waste tire pyrolysis means the process that under a sealed furnace with proper heating. The main chain of the rubber in tires are cracked into monomer, biopolymer, and fragments, which then be polymerized to many kinds of olefins, thus get rid of the volatile substance to solid carbon. Crude palm oil is an edible oil derived from pulp of oil palms. It is naturally reddish in color as it contains high amount of beta-carotene. So palm oil is an extremely versatile oil that has many different properties and function, which makes it is so useful and so widely used. So palm biodiesel is an alternative fuel derived from palm oil that can be used in compression ignition engines. For example, it can be used in diesel engine without any modification. It refers to methyl ester derived from palm oil through a process known as transesterification. So tire pyrolysis and crude palm oil can be used in diesel engine, but the properties of this fuel must be studied. So there are a few advantages and disadvantages of this tire pyrolysis oil and crude palm oil. First advantage is it is renewable energy source. As we know, palm are renewable energy source. Then it can reduce waste. Waste tire can be reduced if they were recycled as a fuel. And next, a valuable output product. Waste tire can give another product such as steel wire and carbon black. So for the disadvantage of this alternative fuel is first environment problem. Illegal pyrolysis plant will lead to an environment pollution. And next, increased NOx emission. Biodiesel will increase NOx emission because it contains more oxygen. And lastly, it is more expensive than fossil diesel fuel. So we move to the problem statement. Alternative fuel can be blended with diesel, but the percentage of this fuel mix with diesel must be appropriate. So the problem comes when combustion of standard diesel fuel result in high content of harmful exhaust gases. Then, the diesel fossil fuel is non-renewable energy. So for the objective of this study, the first is to investigate the properties of fuel mixture of biocrude fuel, tire pyrolysis oil, and biodiesel, and then to analyze the percentage of fuel blends under high blending of biocrude fuel, tire pyrolysis oil, and biodiesel. So for the scope of this study, the first is the experiment used three types of fuel, which is blended tire pyrolysis, blended crude palm oil, and standard diesel. Next, the blending process will be maintained at 270 rpm. Number 3, different alternative fuels which are TPO5, TPO10, TPO15, CPO5, CPO10, CPO15, and standard diesel. And lastly, only 5 properties will be analyzed, which is density, viscosity, flash point, acid value, and water content. So this is the literature review that I used to finish this project. So for the first article is potential of tire pyrolysis oil as an alternate fuel for diesel engine. So the finding is 44.5% of tire pyrolysis oil can be purified as fuel. TPO has comparable viscosity, density, flash point, and heating value as diesel fuel. However, it contains more sulfur than diesel fuel in the compression ignition engine. And lastly, an enormous value of TPO viscosity adversely affects the atomization of the fuel, but high viscosity and oxygen content improve the combustion reaction. So for the summary of this article focuses on process of waste tires and its application, and then it study on how tire pyrolysis oil properties impact the engine performance. So we move to the second article. The title is Enhancing the Fuel Properties of Tire Oil Diesel Blend by Doping Nano Additive for Green Environment. So the finding is by adding suitable additive to tire pyrolysis oil mixture, brake thermal efficiency will improve and emission will decrease. Because of the high surface to volume ratio, a rise in nanoparticle size resulted in an improvement in fuel characteristic. So the flash point are decreased with increasing the concentration of tire oil mix because of the structure of tire oil blends contain soaked and unsaturated fatty acids bigger molecular mass. So for the summary, when CEO2 nano additions are mixed with gasoline mix, the fuel characteristic increase significantly. So for the third article, experimental investigation on performance and emission characteristic of waste tire pyrolysis oil diesel blends in a diesel engine. So the findings is waste tire pyrolysis oil blends have fuel qualities that are equivalent to diesel under the standard EN 590, and they may be utilized as fuel in compression ignition engine without modification. Then the viscosity affects the atomization of fuel upon injection into the combustion chamber. And lastly, the higher the viscosity will cause a problem to the engine, such as formation of engine deposits. So for the summary, in terms of torque and power output, waste tire pyrolysis oil diesel blends perform similarly to diesel fuel in the test engine. So for the next article, the production and comparison of fuel properties on biodiesel with alternative fuel. In comparison to diesel fuel, biodiesel fuel is more soluble in water. Surrounding conditions are all factors that might hasten biodiesel deterioration. So blended biodiesel that stored in ventilated area resulted in a large rise in acid value and water capacity. And lastly, the overview effect of biodiesel storage on properties and characteristics. The finding is the rising in acid value number is faster if it is exposed directly to the sunlight. So when the storage time increase, the density of biodiesel increase. It is due to increase in molecular interaction of degraded biodiesel as peroxide were formed. So for the summary, it is to ensure the quality of biodiesel can be properly maintained. The control substance must be carefully studied. Next, we move to the methodology. For this project, it has 3 stages involved. For the stage 1 is literature review, which is for my final year project 1. It is done until the literature review. So for the stage 1, I collect information from past researcher and come out with literature review, and then I define the objective and scope of the study. Next, for the stage 2, it is a blending process. So the first thing that we need to consider before the blending process is the percentage of alternative fuel with diesel. And then the blending temperature, which is 60 degrees Celsius, the blending speed, which is 270 rpm, and lastly, the time to blending the fuel is 1 hour. So as we can see, here is the blending machine that I will use. And lastly, stage 3 is the properties testing. So the property that I use is to test the properties meter Toledo diamond scale, viscolite 700, volumetric Fischer titrators, titration process, and lastly Penske-Martens PMA4. So this is the blending machine component. Next, the equipment that I use for this properties testing. The first is meter Toledo diamond scale. It is used to measure the density. The standard that I refer is ASTM D1217. Next, the viscolite 700, used to measure the viscosity of the fuel based on standard EN 3679. And the volumetric Fischer titrators, it is used to determine the water content. The standard that I refer is EN 12937. And the titration process, used to measure the acid value. The standard that I refer is EN 14104. And lastly, the Penske-Martens PMA4. It is used to determine the flash point of the blended fuel based on standard EN ISO 2719. For the expected result, as we can see, here is the graph that I get from the past researcher. So for the density of the fuel, we can see that the tire pyrolysis oil have the highest number of density, and then the flash point, biodiesel have the flash point within two fuel here, and then the kinematic viscosity, it shows that tire pyrolysis oil have the highest viscosity, and lastly the CT number, the highest CT number is on the diesel fuel. So TPO has a relatively higher viscosity, density, and lower CT number than diesel fuel. So the higher the density and viscosity can affect the process of atomization during biodiesel combustion, resulting in lower engine performance and increased NOx emission. And lastly, for the conclusion, from previous study, the different ratio of fuel mixture will give significant characteristic. So the properties of the fuel must be analyzed for better quality. So this is the reference that I use for my project, and that's all from me. Thank you for your attention.